Welcome to the Authority File, the podcast that features conversations about the life cycle of scholarly communication. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice. In this 4-episode series, which is generously underwritten by Springer Nature, we're discussing how Springer's publishing operation, particularly in the STEM field, is evolving to meet the requirements of open access while managing the opportunities and challenges posed by artificial intelligence. Joining me to talk through this is Harmen van Paradijs, Vice President, STM Books Publishing and Books Business Optimization at Springer Nature. But before we get started, if you want to keep up on the latest programming from the Authority File, you can subscribe to our monthly newsletter for information on the current and previous month's episodes. To subscribe, simply visit choice360.org, click on the newsletter sign-up banner in the top right corner, and select the Choice Podcast Updates option. While you're there, you can also sign up for other newsletters published by Choice. In this final episode of our series, we discuss the ways in which AI is increasing research volume, how it's reshaping the competitive landscape in academic publishing, and how it's finding its way into the content agreements between publishers and libraries. AI has enabled or is enabling greater publication volume. Are you seeing this at Springer? And then, how are you preparing for that? For that increase in volume.
Actually, we haven't seen that increase in terms of submissions, not on a submission level.
Okay.
I guess the tools that authors are using are helping them, hopefully helping them in terms of efficiency, so they can be quicker turnaround. But then at the same time, I don't think there's other things that also are giving them more of a time demand, if you will. So it's not like that they can write two manuscripts or have two manuscripts where maybe a year or 2 years ago they might have one. So we're not seeing that. Very slowly we are helping authors to be more efficient, but it hasn't doubled the output, for example.
Okay. Excellent. So, more broadly, I guess, how do you see going forward AI adoption, shaping the competitive landscape in academic publishing, both on the publishing side, maybe even on the research side, and then kind of what that means for potential collaboration or even differentiation between, the larger publishers and smaller or society publishers.
I I'd hope that each and every publisher is actually able to tap into the AI tools and authors, for that matter. I see it as let's call it a tool, a way of working that could be used by each and every author, and therefore I don't think it's not something that is unique to Springer Nature or unique to any of the other publishers.
Yeah.
I think the distinguishing factor could be that a policy, an AI policy, is actually in place, that the authors know what they're getting into, and that there's governance on that side. And of course, maybe as a smaller publisher, you might not have that either time or knowledge to actually, in the short term, invest in that, because it does take time to develop such a policy, of course, and you need to keep on developing it. Maybe that's the area where I can see that there could be a distinction, but the use of, for example, GPT or Chat GPT, that could be done by anybody.
Right.
That's not a tool unique to us. We're all tapped into that, and authors are finding their ways to actually make use of those tools.
Yeah. I imagine though that like sort of on a policy level or from a policy perspective, there might be some standardization across, the publishing landscape. Publishers may want to approach this in a unified, manner.
Yep, true. And it's a careful dance, if
Yeah.
you will, because you don't want to, you can't approach your competitors and say, well, let's just start the industry standard for this, or we'll just get together and define whatever it needs to be. So we do that. But then through the STM Association,
Yeah.
they have set up quite a robust framework on this
Hmm.
to actually see, okay, how, where do we all align? What do we all see? How can we bring our minds together to actually come up with a framework? And probably to a similar degree also with COPE, Commission on Publishing Ethics, as a similar way to actually connect with our competitors, to work through that. I think that's crucial.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. You would need an independent governance body to kind of manage all of
Exactly.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm.
And then, getting kind of into the nitty gritty or the more practical end of things, how do you see the influence of AI shaping the structure or terms or even value propositions of content agreements between academic publishers and the libraries that are licensing or purchasing the materials?
I'm To be honest, I'm not so sure.
Okay.
I think this really becomes a let's call it sales question rather
Mm.
than a publishing question. I would think a certain level of AI adoption, if you will, within the content um, would be requested by readers or by academics. Um, are libraries up to that? Are they totally into that? I don't know.
Hmm.
If they would like to have that, I think it comes back to the transparency question. They would need to know, what are you actually, what are you doing? To what
Yes.
level? How ethical is that?
Right.
I think that really is key in on the licensing side, because otherwise you're not providing value or perceived value, if you will.
Right. Yeah, I can say like anecdotally, we do sometimes speak with librarians who are keeping an eye on, as they're looking at these publishing agreements, they're combing through them for instances where AI comes up or might be mentioned in an agreement or licensing agreement or contract or something. So they're for certainly aware of it,
Yeah. Hmm.
and looking at how that might be influencing agreements.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Excellent. Well, Harmon, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Thank you for your questions. Thank you for hosting me. Very much a pleasure to be with you.
You just heard from Harmen van Paradijs, Vice President, STM Books Publishing and Books Business Optimization at Springer Nature. This series is underwritten with generous support from Springer Nature. Remember, if you want to keep up on the latest programming from the Authority File, you can subscribe to our monthly newsletter for information on the current and previous month's episodes. To subscribe, simply visit choice360.org, click on the newsletter sign-up banner in the top right corner, and select the Choice Podcast Updates option. While you're there, you can also sign up for other newsletters published by Choice. The Authority File podcast is brought to you every week by a small but extraordinary team, including Choice's advertising manager Pam Marino, digital media producer Sabrina Kofer, and digital media assistant Ashley Roy. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.